So it's stating the obvious to say that Brexit is complex, and at AHDB we've written thousands, tens of thousands of words about Brexit over the last year that we've published as part of our Horizon series. We think it's crucial that the industry understands the major challenges ahead and the opportunities that Brexit will present. So far, we've looked at a whole range of issues, and they include the trade patterns post-Brexit, our trading patterns with the EU, importantly, the WTO rules and the framework that creates in terms of limits on domestic policy and trade options. We've looked at how other countries around the world support their agricultural sectors. We've looked at issues such as migrant labour and availability, and we've also looked at our regulatory framework. But with this report, we've gone a step further. We've worked with Agri-CAS Consulting to frame the question, what does change look like? Now, I'm delighted to say that the technical authors who actually did the difficult bit, the modelling work, are here with us today. Dylan Bradley. Barclay Hill is not with us, but Dylan is, so he is available to talk about any technical aspects of the modelling. So, what does change look like? We're here to sketch out as wide a possible landing zone, and this conversation will evolve, I think, as more information becomes available. It's not a forecast of what will happen. Sadly, we don't have that crystal ball, but it's an examination of the relative impact of trade, labour and agricultural support policies, as well as the differential effects by sector size and performance of enterprises. Brexit is going to affect different sectors in different ways, and we need to understand those nuances. It examines the impacts of the potential extremes of policy rather than attempting to forecast what those policies will be, and it's aimed very much at the farm business. Now, whilst I'm aware that many of you in the room today are not farmers, this does impact your supply base. It should help you understand the challenges that your supply base is facing, as well as enabling you to think through the implications of Brexit on your businesses. So, apart from the 4 variables under consideration, we've kept everything else equal, as models do, which means that exchange rates, inflation, differences in the macroeconomic variables, economic growth and so on, are kept stable in order for us to examine the differential effects of the 4 variables we wanted to look at. Those of you familiar with modelling will know the limits of econometric modelling in that it treats products as homogenous, so wheat is wheat, and we've heard from Jack and Amandeep this morning that actually, in reality, it's a highly fragmented market with imports and exports going on simultaneously, and many of those different segments being in net import or net export. The model just treats wheat as wheat, and it simplifies the picture. But we have in our technical report, which is also available on the website, undertaken sensitivity analysis so that it is possible to estimate where your individual suppliers may be on the spectrum. So I want to take you through the scenarios. First, evolution is probably as close to the status quo, given that we know we're not going to be part of the single market. Now, the accepted wisdom out there is there will be a certain amount of trade friction associated with no longer being in the single market, and that's between 5 and 8% of the total transaction costs, and that's made up of those additional customs checks, the paperwork, the non-tariff barriers that Amandeep referred to in her presentation. So, in our first scenario, we've looked at evolution being a free trade agreement made with the EU, but we've left agricultural support, labour costs and regulations unchanged. So that is as close to the status quo. Next, we look at unilateral liberalisation. Now, under this scenario, there is no trade deal with the EU, but the UK has decided to unilaterally lower all its agricultural tariffs to 0. In addition to this, there's a 50% reduction in agricultural support, and the way we measured that, we looked at the total overall level of support, both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and then we halved that total and we put the whole lot under Pillar 2 type support. We've also looked at the cost of labour, Again, the details of these scenarios are in your pack, so this is not an exhaustive explanation, otherwise I'd take up the whole of my time presenting, just talking to you about the scenarios. But we looked at if we had shortages in the permanent labour force, and as you know, a significant number of those are made up of EU nationals, then labour costs would rise by approximately 50%. And then what the press often refer to as hard Brexit or no deal, and we've called this scenario Fortress Britain. In this, we have no deal with the EU, and we revert to WTO tariffs, the most favoured nation principle. So the common external tariff of the EU, if you like, is applied to all UK imports and exports. In this, we've assumed that there's a trade-off, that we're given a certain amount of tariff protection and therefore we'll be given even less in terms of agricultural support. So we have a 75% reduction in total agricultural support. Again, a 75% reduction from the current total, and it all goes under Pillar 2. And here, both permanent and seasonal labour costs rise. Regulatory costs are assumed under scenario 2 there's a slight relaxation in our unilateral liberalisation, and regulatory costs are assumed to drop by approximately 5%. So before I take you through the results by sector, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the key points. Now, it's really important to understand that the trade impact is important in all sectors, and there are winners and losers in each scenario. But in the specific scenarios that we've modelled, it's interesting to note that policy change has a greater initial impact in most sectors. The key message, and the one that I really want to emphasise, is that the top 25% of enterprises remain viable in every sector, regardless of size, under every scenario. So it just underlines the importance of performance in terms of resilience to Brexit. So whilst the impacts of Brexit can't be underestimated, there are also opportunities, and we will see these as we go through the sector by sector results. And there's plenty that businesses can do now in order to prepare, mitigate, and prepare to take advantage of opportunities. We're so keen not to allow the industry to sleepwalk into Brexit. We really want to draw this point out, that there is so much. It's not a passive process. We don't wait until policies are imposed upon us. There is an awful lot that we can do now in order to prepare. So let me take you through the results by sector. Okay, so this is a difficult graph. Let's have a look exactly where we are on it. The orange line is the current baseline farm business income, which is the income of the average cereal farm within the Farm Business Survey. It's averaged over the last 3 years to reduce the obvious volatility, and farms under this category are predominantly wheat, barley and oilseeds. Now, incomes fall slightly under scenario 1 as a result of that trade friction that I spoke about earlier. So the fact that we have taken a net exporting year means that it costs us more to export our products with that trade friction, and therefore domestic prices, there's a slight downward pressure on domestic prices. Okay. The impact in scenario 1 is relatively small, and it would be reversed in the net importing year. Now, we know once you start chunking up the cereal sector into different segments that's the case for many products, and that is the analysis on that is available in our sensitivity analysis, which is in the full technical report. But look at scenario 2. Now, here we've seen levels of farm support reduced by 50%, and we've seen the tariff protection removed, and you can see the dramatic effect this has had in cereals, and most of that drop is driven by the reduction in direct support. Now, in scenario 3, this is assumed a net exporting year, and there are high tariffs, but that 75% reduction in direct support has actually driven the average cereal farm negative. This assumes farmers do nothing. So this is the modelling work that if this scenario happened tomorrow, that is where we would be. Now, we know what a resilient and flexible bunch that farmers are. So it's very much a sort of, if you like, a static analysis, in that this assumes that farmers will do nothing in response to Brexit. I want to take the cereal sector down one extra level. I won't do this with every single sector. I will gloss through some of the slides, but there's some really important points that I'd like to make here. First is that performance is not necessarily related to size. If you look at the grey, on your screen, they're yellow and grey. The last two colour charts in each little section. If you look at medium and large size farms, you will find the medium farms outperform the large farms in scenarios 2 and 3. And this is due to labour costs. The medium farms have lower labour costs. In our model, the medium farms outperform the larger farms, which is interesting. The other key point, if you look at the far right of the graph, is that consistently those high-performing farms have not just a net positive income, but a very positive farm business income post-Brexit. So here, again, when we're looking at averages, we need to be aware that there's a huge variation either side of that average, and that our top 25% of performers fare very are far more resilient and less affected by that reduction in farm business income. General cropping. I wanted to include general cropping because obviously 70% of general cropping comes from cereals. It's a similar picture, driven predominantly by the reduction in farm business support. But you can see under Fortress UK that income has risen slightly. Now that's due to increased income from processed potatoes. General cropping includes not just cereals, but also whole field vegetable crops. Potatoes is one of them. And potatoes is one of the sectors, which I will quickly show you in a minute, that fares very well under Brexit. There's significant opportunities for import substitution, and therefore the price of the processed potatoes rises significantly and helps drive that farm business income in general cropping. So here was what I was talking about under potatoes. This demonstrates that with trade friction costs and the WTO tariffs, UK prices for processing potatoes will rise significantly. Now, as I said, provided the processing capacity is there, that's a huge opportunity to displace some of that imported product. Just having a look at one of your demand side sectors, if we look at the pig sector, we can see that the UK, first of all, has a large import requirement for pigs, and that's currently met from the EU. Now, under all scenarios, the cost of imports is increased by trade friction, and under scenario 3, it's increased by tariffs. And this allows the UK domestic price and farm business income to drift upwards. Now, it's really important, if you look at slide 3, before you go and rush off and set up as a pig farmer, that you need to be aware that the model can't account for carcass imbalance. So the caveat here is that the price increase estimated here is likely to be substantially mitigated if markets for low value cuts can't be found. The model says that it will increase to that amount, but actually in reality we think the price rises will be of a much smaller magnitude. And it's also important to bear in mind that, again, this is if farmers and consumers do nothing. If we saw price rises to this extent in pork, then consumers would switch to another protein. There's the cross-price elasticity effect to take in mind, but I will definitely direct you to Dylan to talk through those issues. It's important, though, to recognise that the impact of the reduction of direct support has far less impact in pigs than it does in cereals. Very quickly to pass on to dairy, and I won't linger on this slide because I'm sure you've had enough of modelling by now. But dairy is one of the sectors that possibly can take advantage of Brexit. First of all, under unilateral liberalisation, it is facing significant challenges because of the reduction in direct support mainly. But under Fortress UK, if it were to be protected by those high external tariffs, there are significant opportunities for the dairy industry. So there, their fate rests very much in direction of policy. There are both significant downside threats and significant opportunities for the dairy industry, depending on which way policy goes. So in summary, our key messages. I've tried to condense an over 200-page technical report into a 20-minute presentation. And we've also produced a summary report here, which again condenses the 200-page technical report, which is in your delegate packs, which I'd really encourage you to read through because it gives a great deal more detail than I have here today. The main findings. It's fairly intuitive that we understand that where a greater percentage of farm business income comes from direct support, then those businesses will be incredibly impacted under our scenarios, where we've seen a 50% and a 75% reduction in that level of support. So these sectors include cereals and beef and lamb production. Now, with regard to trade, there are both winners and losers. For sectors that are net exporters, the cost of doing business, along with the higher tariff barriers faced in some scenarios, tends to put downward pressure on prices and on farm business incomes. But for net importers, the cost of doing business helps raise domestic prices, apart from sector 2 in the unilateral trade liberalisation. So the cereal sector tends to fluctuate between being a net importer and a net exporter. And I would refer you to the sensitivity analysis in the technical report to examine those differential effects in different years. But the additional cost of labour coupled with the reduction in support pushes farm business income negative under scenario 3. But the key message to take away is that top 25% of performers in every sector remain positive. So there's so much the individual business can do now. We need to get that message out there. It's all very well having the work done and having the reports here, but unless we get those messages out to industry, we can't help them prepare and mitigate the effects of Brexit. So we'll be going out to talk to our levy payers. We've picked up through our levy payer survey that there is a little bit of a wait and see approach. Well, there's not much that we can do now. Let's wait and see what comes out of government. Let's wait and see the policy options. Let's wait and see what happens with trade. We want to get across the point that wait and see is a high-risk strategy. There's plenty that businesses can do to get fit for Brexit, and AHDB are here and very keen to promote the message, and we'll be running a series of meetings in conjunction with the National Farmers Union around the country in the next couple of weeks. We've seen that performance is key to building resilience, and the first thing that I would strongly encourage businesses to do, and businesses in your supply base to do, is to go out and benchmark. AHDB benchmarking, it will be an essential tool to make sure that your supply base is in that top 25% of performers. And we'd strongly encourage you to come and talk to us today about Farm Bench. We're also keen to harness the proven ability of UK farmers and the supply chain to absorb and adjust to shocks. We've seen that before, and AHDB wants to promote this ability and identify the constraints, increase our knowledge exchange activity and our skills trainings to assist the industry to get fit for the future. In our Farm Excellence platform, we harness the peer-to-peer farmer learning via Strategic and Monitor Farms. So in conclusion, with our previous analysis that Jack referred to, having looked at the impact of Brexit at industry level, and now with our latest publication extending this analysis to farm level, we're keen to get together in this panel session to discuss what you see as the major challenges ahead for your businesses. We can then use that feedback and channel it to further develop our resources to help everyone across the industry make better business decisions. We're keen to work with you, very keen to work with you, and we very much look forward to hearing your views during our panel discussions. Thank you.